Good evening. It is Tuesday, 7:30, and we are back here at Pump Up the Volume. Welcome, everyone, to all our listeners. Thanks for tuning back in. I just want to give thanks again to my fellow co-host, Mr. Bill Bartholomew from the Bartholomew Town podcast. Hey, Bill. Thank you so much to Mr. Pat Ford, founder of the Coalition Radio Talk Network, and also the gracious person that's given us this platform and medium to share our perspectives and to lift up the voices of community, and to Mr. Roberto Gonzalez, Executive Director of Steambox Rhode Island, bringing perspectives of youth and everything new and disruptive here to the show. I want to also welcome a special guest today, Senora Ramona Santos Torres, the Executive Director for Parents Leading for Educational Equity. She has accepted graciously the invitation to join us here and Pump Up the Volume, and brings a wealth of perspective and information from the grassroots, right? From communities, from parents, especially as we approach this reopening of schools. And so, as you know, while in previous weeks on shows, we've really focused on multiple topics, we've tried to bring it all to you and really, like a fire hose, just give you as much information as possible so that, you know, we can empower communities to amplify their voices and to confront the status quo and the establishments that are often making decisions without really seeking the perspective of communities. Today, we're taking a slightly different approach. Not that we're not challenging the status quo, not that we're not challenging the establishment or bringing information to you and to empower you to act right on behalf of your communities and families, but we are being a little more focused this week. And the focus of today's show is, in fact, on education equity, and on our school systems preparation, or their preparation for the reopening that we're seeing soon within the next 2 months, given that we are still in a global pandemic confronting COVID-19. So, as always, to kind of lead us in to this discussion, my hope was to have Mr. Bill Bartholomew, who has the pulse of, what's going on throughout the state of Rhode Island as a leader in independent media, as well as Mr. Pat Ford. But Bill can give us a kind of rundown of how this kind of narrative that the administration has around reopening of schools has evolved, what some of the concerns are that have been echoed in the community. Maybe we can start there, and then we'll immediately hand it off to Ms. Santos Torres so that she can give us really the truth, right, of what parents and students are feeling, their concerns and their ideas. So, Bill, lead the way.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be here on this outstanding program, and a pleasure to have Ramona on tonight as well. Thanks for hopping on. And, it's interesting. Just a few hours ago, there was a Zoom conference, and we heard numerous parents echoing their concerns to the Rhode Island Department of Education about the realities of going back to school on August 31st, as currently set, I suppose, by the administration. And I think the biggest thing that we're starting to realize now, and you even see it with President Trump just an hour and a half ago, coming out and saying, look, this virus is going to get worse before it gets better, which is something, by the way, that Dr. Munoz has been saying since March 13th, when Bartholomew Town began our coverage of COVID-19. I went back and checked the records, and, you've been right on that, doctor. So kudos to you. Here we are in nearly August with the president coming on board. But what it speaks to with respect to education is you have two different thoughts. One thought is that, we go back August 31st, get as far along in the year as possible with some measure of in-person classes before, frankly, it's impossible to justify at any level politically or morally sending kids back into the building because of a spike in the virus. Then there's the second train of thought, which is that, look, we should never put ourselves in a situation in which students, and thus teachers, support staff, and anyone who comes into contact with those folks are at an increased risk in an environment that is already becoming more and more risky as time moves along. So there's really two different thoughts here. And of course, there's also some folks out there who say, look, send them back. Let's get some kind of herd immunity going. This is a hoax anyway, right? But I think that faction is becoming much smaller, even amongst the most skeptical people that are out there. And I'll summarize, I'll wrap this up by saying that what's going to be interesting is to monitor not only the K through 12 sector, but as we see with the secondary education market, frankly, the decisions that are being made there. We see sports just this past week in the Atlantic 10 at the University of Rhode Island, fall sports pushed to the spring. We're seeing plans rolled out that involve very limited on-campus activity from students. And I think that that will be a barometer to watch as we move forward in the next couple of weeks here. I had Amanda Milkovich from the Boston Globe on Bartholomewtown. It aired today, this morning at ripodcast.com. And one of the things that we talked about was her experience covering education and kids going back to school. And I asked her for her opinion straight up. Do you think we're going back on August 31st? And she said, look, this is as evolving a story as I've ever worked on. The reality is we just don't know. In 2 or 3 weeks, we may see numbers that you couldn't possibly justify kids going back to school. But the bottom line is the infrastructure is definitely not in place right now for a safe and effective return to school. Certainly, when we look at the district-wide plans, or we've got 6 districts in one case coming together to form a consolidated plan, there's nothing that I've seen, nor any reporter that I had a chance to speak with about this, who has said, you know what, there's a rock-solid infrastructure in place for a model, a template. It's not there yet, and it's becoming a dangerous situation, at least in theory, as we move closer and closer to August 31st, with the notion, as Governor Raimondo today told Steve Klampkin, my colleague at WPRO, look, we're going back, and I think it's safe. So very unclear, multiple trains of thought, and it will be interesting to see tomorrow at the governor's weekly COVID-19 press briefing if any new thoughts have entered her mind in the overnight hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Bill. I'm amazed at how many honorary medical degrees have been given out since the start of this crisis, apparently to our governor as well. Just the notion that this is, that children can be put in harm's way because we don't have enough data to show that, they may suffer severe consequences, completely not only disregards or displaces, right, the safety of those children, but also disconnects the fact that if children are sick or get sick in schools and they go home to their abuelitas, to their mothers, to their fathers, that they are putting at risk their families as well. And that's not on the children, that's on the adults in this administration. And so before I go on a little bit of a rampage here about my concerns, which I've always put in previous shows, I do want to lift up again Ms. Ramona Santos Torres. You founded and have been leading as executive director, Parents Leading for Educational Equity, for about 2 years now. And I'm sorry if I got that number wrong. I'll let you correct me if I am wrong. You have found a very unique approach to, I believe it's, really challenging and forcing this administration and elements of the administration to think about how they're approaching the situation, but to also know that parents are paying attention. And you've done so, at least recently, through a series of forums that you've created, live streams through Zoom, which I had the opportunity of participating in one, where you bring experts, whether they're in healthcare or in educational policy, and you allow them to really explain how the system works. And in doing so, it's my belief that you're empowering, right, communities, families, parents, with an understanding of how to use these instruments that are often kind of foreign to communities to actually affect change. And today you had a really interesting third series out of 3 out of 3. So today was the final one, where you brought in an expert from Rhode Island Kids Count. And I thought it was really unique the way they went through the kind of funding process and acknowledged the need for equitable funding formulas, but also acknowledged that that is really not taking place. And I felt like that was meeting me halfway. Roberto and I are on the Equity Council. So we're seeing that from the Equity Council side, which is an extension of this administration. You're seeing it from, an organization like Rhode Island Kids Count, explaining that that's the case. So I'm just interested in really getting your perspective. I don't want to focus you too much on Rhode Island Kids Count and what they gave, but you can feel free to take this conversation wherever you want, from the perspective of, as an executive director, from a parent. We just really want to learn from you and really want to get a sense of what are parents' concerns and how do we move forward?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Munoz, for having me. Just briefly, I am a parent of a Providence Public School student, so I am in the thick of the biggest district with significant challenges. Before COVID-19, so you throw COVID-19 on top of it, like you have a disaster on your hands. So the forums that we did were amazing because we had also, it was a partnership amongst youth organizations. 7 agencies came together, aside from PLE. No, with PLE, 7 youth organizations and PLE as well. And we understood that we needed as community to lead the conversation and create a space where we were setting the agenda, not someone else coming in and telling us where the conversation needed to go. So we are in the process of analyzing all the feedback that we've gotten, and we intend to put out, like a overview or a summary of what we've heard from parents and students. But what I can tell you right now is that first, this is the most complicated, stressful thing I've ever done in my life, in my advocacy life. This is not black and white. This is not either or. This is extremely complex, complicated, and has all these different layers. Before I go on, I want to make sure that people understand that by any, I don't want to suggest that students, educators, families, district staff should be put at risk, right? By any means. But what I am concerned about is we are advocating for an either or. We are trapped into it's either we close schools completely or we open up schools completely. I don't think schools should reopen fully. It's not practical. We don't have the structure to do it. I am highly concerned about our testing structure. We don't have it. There is no plan designed for it. I am worried about, like protective equipment, something so simple that it doesn't seem that schools are going to be, not all schools are going to be providing. So fully reopening schools is not feasible. It cannot happen. And we need to say that, like I'm going to start saying that because I have come to that conclusion now. You cannot do it. My issue is that distance learning is not the solution for many students, particularly students who have disabilities who receive services that distance learning cannot provide. It's just inherently, you cannot do physical therapy. You cannot do, if you need someone, if that student needs a one-on-one, distance learning, it's not going to provide that support. So you are creating and widening a gap for the most disadvantaged students and the multilingual language learner students. So right now, what I am hearing from different parents is we need options. Parents need options to where you can say, I'm going to send my child to school and feel somewhat safe, or I don't want to send my child to school. And I don't think we have those options. And I don't know if those options are even possible. So there is so much that this disease is not letting us plan for it. Like Bill, you mentioned, this is an unraveling thing, right? That we don't know a week from now, 2 weeks from now, how the numbers are going to look like. So we might, in a few weeks, see an outbreak that is just we're going to shut down schools. But from now, I can tell you that as a parent, I am going to fight against a fully reopening of schools because it's not possible. But we need to think about those other students that need a more complex level of support that distance learning cannot provide. Can we find a way to create a space in school buildings where those students can go and receive the supports that they need? That's where we should be able to figure this out, because it should work for everyone. We should not choose one over the other. We should be able, that's not equitable. When we talk about equity, just doing one plan for everyone is not equitable. So that's where my concern is at, that I think we are, deservedly so people are afraid. And again, the confidence on our testing structure, on the way that even the communication goes out, I think a lot of the things that we're seeing are also bad communication in the part of state and local districts. How can we mitigate that so that people really understand the risk and the options that they have right now? We can't advocate efficiently if we don't have the information out, the information that we need. So I want to stop talking because I feel I said, but I have more to say.
No, I mean that yeah, no, and we want to hear it. We want to hear it. So it would be great to get Roberto and Pat to add some points, and then we'll hand it back off. What I would add is some of the things I learned today when we're here in Rhode Island Kids Count on the final forum or the series was this idea that 48% of funding to school systems comes from the state, 44% from municipalities, essentially property taxes, and then the remainder from the federal government. But as we all know, there's about $46 million coming through the CARES Act that can be allocated to school systems. And one of the challenges I have is assuming that there's a lack of equity in Rhode Island, which I believe that there's a grade that Rhode Island was given, which is a poor grade for equity in education. The truth is that there's an opportunity with $46 million to create a unique, equitable funding formula to develop some infrastructure to address the concerns that you've expressed, right? That there are students that may need in-person learning, and how do we develop an infrastructure to protect those students and protect the teachers that are teaching them? I'll share more of my opinion later, but I think it is important to continue to hit this point, which is that all the information that you provided parents and students through the vehicle of these different experts, policy experts, is hinting towards the fact that Rhode Island has done very little with regards to equity and continues to do so. And what we're hearing on the Equity Council, and Roberto can speak more to his experience and overall perspective, is the same exact thing. Nothing has changed. We're bringing this information back. We're challenging them. We're asking them whether they can place human lives over politics, and they're not changing a thing. So Roberto, why don't you lead the way with your perspective? Doesn't have to be specific to the Equity Council, but just generally what your thoughts are on the reopening of schools and what we should be doing.
I want to know what happened to knock it off, right? Like where's knock it off, Gina? Because we went from being what some people challenged her as being overly cautious, and I didn't think that was true then. But to rushing students back to school. There was a meeting that took place just a little while ago to give some people clarity on some of the district's plans, and a student from the Met pointed out the irony of us having the meeting on a call like this, on a Zoom call, instead of an in-person meeting like those things usually happen, because it's not safe to be together. We're having a meeting about putting students together in a time where it's not safe for us to be together close enough to even talk about it. I mean, there's irony there. And I would think that the knock it off person, right, like our state captain, would be there and recognize and realize that. So I'm really challenged and I'm really frustrated. And you see it every week on the Equity Council, especially because they have their talking points and they have their agenda. But while they have their agenda and their talking points, they've pulled in community leaders so that they can get us to co-sign on these things. But we're not leading anything on that Equity Council. And that's really unfortunate, because your skills and expertise, my skills and expertise, and some of the other amazing talent that they pulled together are sitting there just as tokens for having EZ at the end of their name, like Gonzalez, or the OZ like Munoz, or the ES like Torres. You know what I mean? They're pulling those kinds of names together to say, hey, look, we're working on equity. We've got people of color together on our council, when really they're just bombarding us with their talking points of what they're trying to do. I have not been able to get any of my points across to an actionable step.
Roberto, your audio's cutting out a bit, I think.
I feel truly listened to on the municipal level every single week. So just for apples to apples, right? Like at the state level, I feel like we're being tokenized, and at the city level, there's a lot of great work being done, and they could be doing that same thing with a high-powered group that we have at that state level on the equity committee. But to go back to the schools reopening, I want to touch on something that Ramona mentioned a moment ago. She said it's just not possible. In terms of reopening on August 31st, in 5.5 weeks from now, she said it's just not possible. And that's what I keep thinking. And I have this standoffish, laid back, oh, it's just not going to happen kind of feel to it, right? Like when there was a 2 weeks, we're out of school for 2 weeks, we'll come back in April 1st. I had students who actually thought that, like thought that they were going back. I knew that nothing had changed, and I knew that we weren't ready then. So what makes us ready now? So when Ramona says it's not possible, well, how the hell do they think it's possible? What I'm seeing is a house of cards. And I'm seeing a house of cards that has no structure. The cards on the bottom just are not even solid at all. They're not even really cards. They are the illusion of cards. For instance, last year, in many of the schools that I worked in, there were no teachers for certain subjects. There were students, whole classes of math students who couldn't get a math lesson because their teacher was out for whatever reason, leave of absence, out for sickness, whatever it was, and there just aren't enough substitutes. So why now do we think that we can support a system like that in just 5 weeks from now when nothing's changed in an already systematically racist structure anyway? The Johns Hopkins report pointed out systematic racism at every level. So I'm with Ramona, and I think it's impossible. But here's my point to all of you. If it is impossible, and if it is somebody going through the checks and balances to get federal funding or whatever it is, I don't want to make theories about why they're putting us through the ringer. But in the meantime, they're causing significant trauma to the parents who are looking for answers for what's going to happen to their children, to the educators who are looking to answers of, do they have to quit their job right now in order to protect their health? Do they owe it to the students to go in there and, in these like full, pandemic uniforms? They're causing significant trauma, right? And I would imagine that the youth too, who are suffering loss, many of my students have suffered loss during this time. I think this is a really traumatizing charade that we are putting on, because I agree with Ramona. It's a house of cards, and to her words, it's impossible. I don't see how they're going to do it in 6 weeks. Shame on me if I'm wrong. No, shame on them if they're wrong, because that would be a force fit to actually make this work. One last thing I want to mention. It isn't black and white. That was something that Ramona said as well. I do have students that distance learning is not working for, and they do need in-person interactions. So it's more complicated than we might think, right? So there's not like one solution for everybody. I wish I could just say, right off the bat that no, this can't happen, blah, 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 blah. But there is some reason to create some level of in-person learning for students. But the other thing that I think that it's important for all of us to recognize is it is very possible that we are talking about a temporary situation. A lot of people are looking at this as an infinite situation. We are going back to school forever, or we are distance learning forever. That's not the case. There very well might be a vaccine. Things might be able to return back to normal in the next 8, 10, 12 months. I don't know. Dr. Munoz, you can answer this a lot better than I can. But in the meantime, I think it's important to note that we don't want to make guinea pigs out of our students. They are not the canaries that belong in the coal mine. If we have vaccines around the corner, why don't we just wait? I know that answer is not easy for everybody. I know some parents need answers right away for childcare and other things, but I do think that we take a finite approach to this, right? Like we look at the immediate future and take this day by day. Dr. Munoz, you would know better than I.
Thanks for sharing, Roberto. And I would just remind you, Roberto, that before we end this call, you should bring up the case study of Arizona in the event that you want to address the risk factors associated with pods. You have been wanting to mention that for a couple of weeks. So just note that. I would just, lift up a couple of things that you're saying before I hand it off to Pat. We have people that, represent communities of color that are put in these positions and work for this administration, right? They get paid to do this job. And these are really political jobs, especially within RIDE. So we have to draw a line in our understanding of who they're advocating on behalf of. And so when I hear the commissioner say that they have included community feedback and they've taken into account what community said, and they're all about that, and they want municipalities to do that, I just see a disconnect there. The administration hasn't taken feedback from the community. So why should municipalities, right? Because leadership has not reflected what they expect municipalities to do. Second, I would say that they said science is guiding us. Well, if science is guiding you, then you should understand behavioral science. And behavioral science is complicated with youth, especially when you are going to have a complete culture shift in how they should behave and what they should wear. And so this notion, and they brought it up, that we are recommending that you wear a mask, but it would be a requirement. The exception is it would be a requirement if you're less than 6 feet apart. Well, that's not very clear in the guidelines. And so there's this assumption that what is left unsaid should be assumed because it's backed by science, when leadership is not clearly delineating what is science versus what is not. So let me be clear. What is science is wearing a mask, right, with the assumption that you are infected so that you do not transmit the disease to someone else. And that has to be the assumption when you wear a mask. Otherwise, there's enough rationalization out there for people to justify not wearing one. So I just want to bring that up because I heard a few things and they didn't make sense in today's meeting, with RIDE. They barely talked about HVAC systems. And again, they did not talk about equitable funding allocation, given the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in communities of color. So we have a real issue here. And I want to add this one point because it is important to me. This may not be the reality of our judicial system, but if a single child, or as a result of a child being infected, a single teacher and or family member die of COVID-19 because we've rushed to reopen, I don't think this only goes to the governor. I think everyone involved in this decision at the administrative level should be held accountable legally for that death. Mm-hmm. And I mean that because we have enough science to know that we are pushing people into high risk environments. And we've already seen the extreme of that in nursing homes, right? So why is it any different when we're looking at our children? So I just want to take that, put it in perspective in terms of what a physician would be accountable for if they were making a clinical decision that led to someone's death, right? And so let's put it in perspective. Pat, you have the floor.
The teachers don't feel they can safely teach. And we're talking about a group that is overwhelmingly a dedicated, a group of men and women who are largely focused on a mission in life. When you're a teacher, it's not a profession, it's an avocation. It's a ministry, if you will, to students and children everywhere. So the teachers don't feel safe in doing it. I was listening to public radio in Massachusetts yesterday, and a story came up about, I believe in Arizona actually, where 3 teachers worked together and did distance learning out of a single room, spaced. They were adults, wearing masks whenever they could. And one of the teachers caught the disease and died. The teacher population is significantly weighted in many communities towards men and women of experience. That's a nice way of saying they're perhaps a little bit older. We don't have the transportation facilities to get the children to school in a safe manner. Some of the descriptions that Roberto put forth over the last couple of weeks in terms of how busing would be handled would be almost comical if it weren't so deadly serious. The buildings were decrepit and beat up before COVID. And it's apparent to me that what I call the educational, for lack of a better term, the educational industry seems to be the only people committed to getting this open. The League of Cities and Towns weighed in this afternoon in Rhode Island and said that it's just not appropriate. Donald Trump, who is the single, perhaps largest science denier in America spoke in his first press conference in months, and sounded, if you hadn't heard the absolute nonsense that had been spewed by that man for the last 90 days, you would almost think was leadership in questioning, if you will, the current state of affairs and walking just about everything he's represented back. Listen, we can all agree the one thing Donald Trump is doing is walking things back and, denying he ever said them in the first place. So there is this incredible weight of evidence in this nation. There's this incredibly terrible infrastructure in this city to begin with, even under normal times. So by no means at any level does it make sense for anyone, any place, anywhere to send their children to in-person schools. It just simply doesn't. The only people who appear to be hell-bent on it are government administration and or those folks that would profit from it. Now, of course, the question then becomes, what do we do with the children? Because, quite frankly, what the city of Providence, for example, should do is take the next year off and focus exclusively on a return that will include a curriculum that is appropriate, teaching methods, and supporting their faculty in a manner in which they have some chance of success. In one sense, for the school districts, it's an incredible opportunity to rethink and reimagine and reinvent literally everything they do, because largely everything they do has failed on an epic level. The only challenge is, what do we do with the students, and is there something we can do with students and teachers so that at some level, maybe what we do is become less ambitious in the sheer volume of what we're trying to do through distance learning, but actually just dial it all the way back and spend the next year distance learning, providing, now that we've had time to provide some level of infrastructure to folks who are income challenged and don't have the resources themselves to buy additional equipment. But maybe we just dial it all back and focus on the basics: reading, and some math, and just forget about the rest. That's the only practical alternative that I can come up with. Again, understanding that we are placing folks who have, either single parents or folks who, there's a family structure there, but because of the economy are challenged and have to go to work at some level. So, those are the two things we should just drill down on. I have no other suggestions, because unfortunately the dillying and the dallying, if you will, that's gone on in government for the last how many months since we knew this was happening. We knew how this movie was going to end. To your point, Dr. Munoz, you're absolutely right. To our guests, you're absolutely right. We knew how the movie was going to end. Why we're not better prepared for it is, I think, an indictment of Rhode Island Department of Education. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Pat. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give the floor back to you, Ramona, and you can pretty much just lay out for us, what you think the state should be doing in steps in moving forward. And then what's going to, and then maybe transition to your outrage. Like, what's going to keep you up at night? What is it that's getting under your skin? And all of your efforts, right, and all of the energy that you're putting forth, what is it that for some reason or other, is not moving? And so anyway, I don't want to encapsulate too much what you should be saying, but if you could touch on what we should be doing and what is your outrage in moving forward and what you're going to be fighting for, it would be great for the listeners to hear.
So my ideal scenario for August would be that we do some form, if it's safe, some form of in-person, again, for those students who really need that support that distance learning is not going to do. So if there is a way that we could make that happen, yes. But then I don't think it's going to be possible. So let's take the same approach that we did when we opened the state. Let's do that in stages, and let's see what the numbers look like. But again, coming back all of the students, I don't think it's possible. So I think the state should be just saying that. They should just come with a final plan and just say that. Say, listen, we're gonna. And I think I heard at the beginning that was kind of the approach at the very early stages of discussing this, where it was like, we're gonna try to bring students with IEPs, multilingual language learners, to the building so that they can, receive intensive supports, and then the other students might go on distance learning. I feel that the Department of Health should be taking on the conversations about public health. I don't want Rye talking about public health because they are not public health experts. So I feel that the Department of Health needs to take on those. They are the experts. So don't put Rye and the commissioner on that spot to talk about public health. That's not her expertise. So, like, I will feel better, and I think a lot of us will feel better if you hear the person, the expert on that area, talk about what the plan is from the Department of Health, because they have ownership on the reopening of the schools. So that's a part that I need to see more, like engage the Department of Health with us. Um, and again, I'm gonna throw this at you, guys. There are people, there are parents of color, who are waiting for schools to reopen to work. And that's a reality. I know that people say schools are not daycares. Guess what? For some people, they are. For people who have to work 2 jobs, that's the reality of some of our families. They are living that today. So we are putting people in a position of, okay, if a school's closed, I'm not telling you that that's the reason why schools should reopen. But what push are we doing to support those families who are being put in that position, who are facing homelessness, am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to feed my kids? Like, all of those things are tied to this conversation. Because a lot of parents are going to say, I need schools open. I need schools open because I need to go to work. So start to think about that conversation as well, because that's real for a lot of our families. Um, and I think that's my outrage, that we cannot just make this into in one thing problem. It's like a lot of different problems together into this big mess. Uh, and we need to think about all of those different factors, even though they're overwhelming. Because again, I have never in my life have been more stressed out, anxious, and just really, really anxious about what we are going to do a few weeks from now. Because it doesn't seem that anywhere in this country we know what we are going to either. Like what are we going to do with schools? And how are we going to support students? All students, not just students who can access internet, who can have a safe space to study, who can have parents who speak the language and they know how to navigate a computer and can support them. So again, distance learning might work very well for those students, but there is another population, the ones that have been underserved for so long. So let's just think broadly, take all the perspectives into account. What I am going to fight for as a parent is that we need to do this in stages. I don't think it's feasible to open schools fully. I don't think it's feasible to close them down either. We need, if our cases are stable, if there is a way, that's what I'm asking. I'm not a health expert, but if there is a way to support those students who need it the most, let's try to do it if it's possible. That's where I'm at. So I think it's going back to the table and talking to, the superintendent in Providence, who have been receptive to our, suggestions and to the conversations that we've had. And going back to the commissioner, who has been receptive to what we have to say. So yeah, it's just having those conversations and being honest about where we are as a parent organization. I am a stakeholder. My child has disabilities. So I am one of those parents that, I have the privilege that I can work from home and keep my kid home if I need to. But distance learning is not working for my child. Affected her mental health, affected the way that she, that she feels about school. So, we have to take into account all of that. So please gonna fight for students that need more support, but also for making sure that schools are reopened safely. And I don't think that can happen next month fully. Fully, I have to say it again because I want to make sure that people are clear. Like as of today, because we don't know the cases, how they're gonna look like in 2021. But as of today, I don't think fully reopening schools is feasible. But I do want to see a way to support those students that need it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Ramona, and for sharing your personal story as well. Right? I mean, there's two obviously layers to your role, and I would say your perspective, serving as a leader within the community and really within the organization that you founded, but also as a parent. And we appreciate that perspective. And some of the things that you said, I think, are so, like, all of the things you said are important, but some of the things that stood out and really came to the surface for me were the need to acknowledge, right, where we are, and to be honest and to have open discussions. And so I'm kind of going to create a little transition point here for Roberto, because one of the things that's been concerning is there's all these John Hopkins reports, right? And Roberto often references one, but now there's another one coming up that apparently places Rhode Island in a positive light around distance learning as a leader in the country, when frankly, I think it has more to do with having brought up a distance learning program and the speed to which it was brought up, not so much in terms of performance around distance learning. But with that said, we often have this kind of use of language in different ways, or taking an institution like John Hopkins and pushing a bad report off with the next good report, even though contextually they're not the same. And so we lose that acknowledgement of where we are, right? And unfortunately, we miss an opportunity to have a real and open discussion. And that was another bit of one of my concerns in hearing Ride today. So Roberto, you have brought up the John Hopkins report, a couple of years ago, and or a year ago, and you I'm sure you heard the discussion today with Ride. Where do you stand with all of this? What's your outrage?
A lot of it is they keep referring to the health, and the health coming first, right? And paying attention to that. There was a PPSD social media post that showed custodial staff cleaning schools and saying, "Hey, we take everybody's health seriously." And I'm like, then why are we doing this, right? Like, then why are we doing this? And if we want to continue getting the endorsement of CDC, right, the Center for Disease Control, and the work that we're doing at the school level, then I think they need to be a lot more clear, instead of picking and choosing what CDC recommendations they're going to use. For instance, how does the CDC feel about opening schools at all? Right? CDC apparently was going to testify about that this week and was blocked by the White House. You guys would know more than that about that than I would. But that was one of those, quick headlines that I saw. And I'm saying, then where are we getting our information? I know that we're cherry picking things like the 6 feet and the masks and all that stuff. But I can tell you that some of these classes have started, and Steambox is working with some of the summer programs. We're working with multilingual learners, and we're seeing a lot of progress. And I think one of the dangerous things is it's at the discretion of the adults in the room. So we've got some of the younger students being diligent with the masks and the distancing in a lot of the rooms. And then you'll see other rooms that are less. And these are causing interesting conversations among Steambox ourselves, right? Because now we're having conversations about, is it responsible for us to come in and do this stuff? Even though we're doing it digitally and we're showing up on a screen and we're not in person, can it be viewed as an endorsement? We got a really nice shout out from some of the people at PPSD today saying, "This made my day. Steambox was working with some of these young kids." And I was like, my first thought was, "Wow, that's great. They're acknowledging Steambox." But my second thought was, "Oh shit, like they're putting Steambox's name on these death traps, right? Like in the classrooms." And I'm not knocking any of those people involved, because they're going out and they're doing their work. And I too am looking at students and saying, "Hey, these students are in a terrible predicament. How can I serve them despite all of that?" So I know that's a long roundabout way to come back to these CDC recommendations, cherry picking information, and using little bits and pieces and sound bites to validate this train that we are running, scheduled for August 31st, with all of our children aboard it and no real bridge across yet, right? Like, so far there's still the bridge isn't finished. Like, it looks like that train is, I don't get it. Sorry, I know I mixed a billion metaphors there, but it's not just outrage. Before I want to get into how hopeful I am, and I'm going to wrap it up, and I want to give Pat the floor and everything. I want to bring it back to the Equity Council one more time, because Ramona reminded me of some of these common threads, right? Like if this, then what? So if parents need childcare services and all of this other stuff, and we're going back to the distancing and back to closing schools and other things, then where does that leave some of those people? And that's what Lewis and I and other people are really trying to push for in the Equity Council, except there's no platform for it at the Equity Council level. And that's disturbing to me, because you have them saying, here's our community leaders building the answers and making this equitable, but they're not allowing us to build. And you brought up a point that's very specific. If parents need answers, right, for childcare, if we need resources, and if I say at that Equity Council level, we need resources for the parents, we need to look into this, we need to do this, and they say, oh no, we're sorry, we just did this presentation, we filled up this week, and next week we got a different guest talking about a different thing. One time it was the social equity greenhouse, and they're cool. I just don't get, like, I feel like there's other pressing matters. So they sent someone to have a conversation with me, and I believe they did you too, Dr. Munoz. They sent somebody to have an offline conversation with me to try to, like, put out the fire. And I said, here's what we need. We need an independent leader for these meetings, so that the meetings are not state run, so that the meetings are coming from a third party who can facilitate these meetings. And we need breakout rooms for each of the different topics where the leaders can really roll up their sleeves and dig in on their expertise. And the person who was very nice, who called me and I had that conversation with, he said to me, that's just, I want to be real with you, that's just not going to happen. Well, what the heck am I here for? What am I here for then? You know what I mean? Like, why do you even have me here? Are we wasting people's time? I'm sorry. That's been for weeks boiling up about the Equity Council, but my sign off is this: it's not outrage. I'm thinking about the possibilities, because we faced and are facing multiple crises, whatever, right? like at home in the U.S. and as Earth, and right now, that's when innovation happens. Right now, I'm looking at my model and I'm saying, all right, I have multilingual learners, and some of them are speaking all of these different languages. It's not just Spanish, right? Like, I know a lot of us think multilingual learners are just Spanish, but I'm serving these students across all of these different languages, and it's digital now, right? So I lose all of the charisma that I can bring into the classroom because now I'm just on a screen. Well, how can I serve them better? And if we have a lack of teachers and we have a lack of space, and as Pat mentioned, and Pat is so right about the infrastructure of the schools, just the buildings themselves being health hazards, now is the time where we can innovate. And as we pointed out, and I've been saying for weeks, digital learning is not for all of my students. I have students who need in-class learning. Well, now's the time where we can figure out and we can start to custom tailor some of the learning to the appropriate students, because now we're reaching students that we've never reached before by doing distance learning. My son, who is as introverted as I am, is very happy to be home learning on his computer. So I think there's in-betweens, there's some cracks happening in the system, and right now it's a beautiful age for innovation. So I'm actually very hopeful. I'm not hopeful about school starting on August 31st. I'm very hopeful that we can figure out alternatives for all of those parents, for all of the students, for new age learning. I'm sorry I used a lot of oxygen. I want to turn it back over.
Well,
all right, thanks for sharing all that, Roberto. So I'm gonna, Pat, you can go ahead. Yeah.
I'm actually going to feed off of Roberto's positive oxygen, and right after Dr. Munoz and Bill wake up from passing out, the fact that I could be optimistic about anything. If we stick to the basics, let me preempt this. The single greatest failure in all of this, when I mean this life we now have, this life post-COVID, is that after 6 months, untold millions, quote unquote, the greatest minds in this part of America, that there was no plan B. that we couldn't address in the manner from which these folks are so quick to pat themselves on the back. Nonlinear thinking, tiger teams, all the cliches apply. The fact that we didn't have a plan B, having anticipated a rebirth, if you will, a resurgence of COVID, is possibly one of the single greatest failures in Rhode Island governmental history. So again, let's go positive then. Let's take what resources we have. Let's focus on mathematics and reading. Let's address, finally, take a year off and address the reading and the English language issues and the multi-language learner issues that have been such a challenge for Rhode Island's majority community, for folks who literally from around the world. Let's just focus on that. Let's cut everything else out. Everything else is nonsense. You know, my wife specializes in dyslexia. I've gotten to know a number of experts in that area, and they all have the same mantra. From grades 1 to 3, you learn to read, and grades 3+, if you will, on forward, you read to learn. Our children in Providence have a decided, keep it positive here, challenge in literacy. They just do. That's ugly to admit in the year 2020. It's painful. It's not for the lack of money. The school system has burned through billions and can't accomplish its basic goal. Let's innovate, but at the same time, bring it back to the basics. If a year from now, we're able to greatly raise that literacy rate amongst all the children in Providence, not just the kids on the east side, not just the special ones, but all the children who come here from so many different places and are part of our community. If we can accomplish that and just focus on that, achievable goals, then we will have finally done right by our children, at least in one respect. That's all I got.
Thanks, Pat. All right, Bill, you're up.
Well, there's a slide from today's presentation that indicates, I'm looking at it right now, preparing to reopen August 1st through August 17th. And then school opening and beyond, August 17th through August 31st. So, you know, what's going to go on here? I mean, they've got all these plans right now. RIDE has all these plans that are, you know, inherently going to shift completely between now and next week and the following week. So my question, I don't know if it's an outrage. My question is how nimble. We've heard tonight a lot of different perspectives on why we need to have a combination of systems, online distance learning, in-person learning, a blend of the two, common sense, and so on and so forth. How nimble is RIDE? That's the question that I have, and we'll find out, right? We won't really know until we hit August 31st and we see what kind of operation we have. Is it a situation that can be implemented in Providence the same way that it can be implemented in Westerly? We're going to find out. But I want to read this statement here because I think it's a good way to go out. And you can take it for what it is. This came the other day from a joint statement from Governor Raimondo, Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green, and the Health Director, Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott. And I'll read it for you. Every step of the way, our response to COVID-19 has been driven by science. We have rejected the false choice of an all-or-nothing approach and taken targeted, data-driven steps to keep Rhode Islanders safe. As we look toward reopening schools, we'll continue to put public health first and to rely on facts and science in making the best decisions for the mental, physical, and intellectual needs of our students. And we'll find out, right? 31st, you know, were they lying? Were they making it up as they went along or not? Mark it down right there. That statement, what I just read right there, you know, and hey, we won't really know until we hit that mark. But my gut is that when we go back and see that statement in a month and a half from now on this program, we're going to say, huh, that's funny because everything that was in that statement goes against what we're experiencing right now.
So let me say one thing really quickly and hold me to this. I am going to be, and I am the most negative, cynical person. You're probably one of the most cynical. I'm going to believe that our leaders are going to end up doing the right thing. It's going to take pushing from us. We're going to have to push for this. But if in a month or so from now, like you said, Bill, you read that statement, we read that statement, all of us, because I'm going to go back to that statement wherever I am at. And the decision that was made goes against that, then we are going to have to be, loud and do things. You know, we often talk about taking it to the streets, protest or do whatever we need to do. Like, I want to believe that our leaders don't want to put our kids at risk. So they're going to have to prove to us that they, and I truly believe that, you know, the governor and the commissioner and Dr. Alexander Scott are going to do the right thing. So we are going to tell them what we want as a community, and we're going to see what, you know, time will tell. But we're going to push for the things that we need as a community.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I just want to put this in, from my perspective, into perspective. This administration rolls dice all the time. They've done it on economic terms. I think they're playing the same game with respects to health terms. You know, I just want to preface my statement by reminding everyone I'm a medical doctor. I am actively involved in contact tracing and epidemiological efforts in Massachusetts. I am a technology entrepreneur focused at this time in the private sector on supply chain and understand resource shortages and how to access those resources and the time frame that is needed to establish a pipeline for resources. And I am currently on the Equity Council, which was not by choice of this administration, but because leaders within communities like Providence lifted my name up along with Kia from DARE, along with Roberto Gonzalez from Steambox RI, to serve as antagonists, to ask the hard questions, to challenge the administration, and to force them to think. Because at times it doesn't seem like it's truly thinking. And if it is, it's within a box and not outside of it. And we need out of the box thinking now. And so I just mentioned all my credentials, not to lift myself up, because again, all of you, many of you listening know me already. This is not about me. This is about you. This is about your families and making sure that you and your families are safe. But I feel like it is important to establish some medical credibility with what I'm about to say. We are about to open schools. And when I presented a question to this administration and some of its consultants regarding opening of schools, specifically higher ed, but within that context, also addressing K through 12, I asked them whether they had considered health coordination teams, essentially teaming nurses with mental health workers, with testing coordinators, with contact tracing case managers, so that in the event that children were found positive, we could support those children, we could support their families, and we could identify where a potential spread, an epicenter, point of spread was occurring, and obviously mitigate, slow the spread of COVID-19, not only within the school system, but throughout our communities that school system serves. And that consultant, I will not name because this is not a reflection of her, but she chuckled. And I believe that chuckle, I don't know if you heard it, Roberto, was a byproduct of her understanding that this administration would not allocate funds for health coordination teams as I describe them currently. Not for one school, let alone hundreds of schools, right? Not for one school system, let alone multiple school systems. And so if the consultants that this administration is paying to lead the way to school reopening are chuckling at a question prefaced or based on the notion of having health coordination teams that can protect our children, our communities, and families, then what does that say about the administration that's hiring them, the administration that you've elected? You've elected. If you haven't voted, you've elected it by omission. If you voted for it, then admit that you've elected this administration. If you voted against it, then good for you. Continue to do the work for the next election cycle. But bottom line, this is pretty much political. You know, this is not about whether the governor, whether the commissioner, whether the director for the Department of Health have a good heart. This is not about that. I frankly don't care about friendships. I don't care about, whether, they have a specific religious belief, a specific intention behind their heart. I'm seeing the byproduct of their leadership and the actions that are being taken, and the consequences of those actions are what keep me up at night, or the potential consequences, to say the least. So my outrage today is the potential, this foreshadowing of what can happen. And everything within me that understands medicine, that understands medical knowledge, that understands the science and the research that has been done is eating away at me, seeing that we're moving forward with this idea that science is driving us, when if anything, it should be slowing us down. It should be forcing us to take a step back. It shouldn't be driving us. It should be stopping us. Not to do it permanently, to your point, Mrs. Santos Torres, not that children shouldn't be in school, not that families won't benefit from children being in school, but we need infrastructure. Because the very families that are working 2 jobs, sending their child to school, will be the families potentially infected with COVID-19 if there's a spread in a school system. And they serve the local economies, and those local economies will suffer, and those economies will likely be disproportionately communities of color, right? It will be embodied by communities. And that's a fact. So as we all move forward, and as we consider what we need to do next and the next steps, I want everyone to feel comfortable in acknowledging that the leaders that are serving you today are on a path that is not the correct one. Not because the end goal is not a good end goal, but because the steps that they're taking to reach that end goal are placing our children and our families at risk. So in moving forward, let's all step up. Let's do what we can. Let's bring our different perspectives. And you've heard 5 different perspectives today. All I believe, all 5 of us, with the intention, of course, of protecting communities, of finding a way to keep Rhode Islanders safe. Let's bring more perspectives into this discussion. Raise your voices, pump up the volume, and come back here next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. where we'll be bringing other issues to the forefront that are needed, that you need to hear. So thank you so much for joining us.
Pump up the volume.
Have a good night. Pump up the volume.